Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Welcome to a new video, and we're going to talk about a jury in Florida found Chiquita Brand's liable for the death of several people in Colombia by a terrorist death squad. We're going to talk about this case and the history, but first, this is Latina Literati. This is a momentous moment in legal history. A jury in the Southern District in Florida found that Chiquita International Brands supported the AUC terrorist group sufficient to foresee harm to the people of Colombia. This is huge. It's the first time that a global corporation has been found to be directly linked to violence, to torture and murder in other countries, and the jury awarded the victims' families $1.7 million. Of course, Chiquita says they will appeal it, but this is important. This is really a big deal because corporations for over 100 years have run amok, have done what they wanted in other countries, and there has been no consequences. And so we're seeing for the first time that the courts in the United States are saying, look, you are a U.S. corporation. You cannot pay others, third parties, to kill people in other countries. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the history of Chiquita Brands to understand why it is considered the deadliest corporation ever to exist in Latin America. The case is brought by the families of 8 victims of this paramilitary squad in Colombia that has been listed as a terrorist organization in the United States. And so the nexus was that over several years, Chiquita paid this death squad and may have even directed their activities, because it just so happened that people that were asking for just wages or changes to working conditions at the different Chiquita farms were the ones that were tortured and killed. So it doesn't seem random at all. And so this nexus of payments from Chiquita International Brands to this paramilitary group in Colombia is what allowed the case to be brought in the United States against this global corporation. So how does Chiquita International Brands prioritize profits over people? Well, Chiquita International Brands, their managers on the ground in Colombia, paid the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, that's the name of the terrorist group, $1.7 million over a number of years. They were basically directed to not just kill, but torture and kill the people who were standing up for their rights in the banana plantations in Colombia, and people who had nothing to do with the banana plantations, but whose land Chiquita wanted to buy at below market prices. So imagine you're tending your farm, minding your own business, and these ruffians come in and say, we're going to buy your land, and you say, no. So they kill you so that your family then has to sell your land at the price they say, which is much lower than the market price. I mean, this is barbarianism if you could ever find a case of it. It is so egregious that civil suits are fine, but I feel like there should be a criminal suit brought as well. So the 17-year-old case is brought about because of these payments, $1.7 million, between more or less 1997 to 2004 that Chiquita International Brands makes to this far-right paramilitary terrorist group. It's interesting because the Justice Department, the United States Justice Department, had already received a judgment against Chiquita in 2007. And so that sets the stage for then the families of the victims to then bring this case in federal court in Florida to say, wait a minute. So the U.S. Justice Department has found Chiquita Brands liable, and we should be compensated for the lives of our loved ones. Chiquita International Brands is what we're looking at, but its parent company, the United Fruit Company, was the largest multinational corporation, global entity working in, or rather extracting from, countries from Mexico all the way down to Colombia. And in every one of those countries, you can see the violence that this corporation brought to the people of those countries. Just horrific, horrific violence in all sorts of different instances. And we're going to talk a little bit about them, but I wanted to just kind of set the stage. So you have the United Fruit Company, brainchild of two New Yorkers. I won't get into who set it up, but the bottom line was that they were very close to the U.S. government and the U.S. State Department. So throughout their antics and their violence, the U.S. State Department is at all times backing this U.S. corporation because, of course, from the U.S. global perspective, the only thing that matters are corporate profits, not the people on the ground that are being abused by U.S. corporations. The United Fruit Company was known as El Pulpo. That means the octopus, because it had its tentacles in everything. So not just agriculture, electrical grids, railroads, ports, all manner of infrastructure, because corrupt governments, they would pay off government officials and they would receive almost no pay leases or very low leases on these huge tracts of land, sometimes belonging to other people like the indigenous people. And then they would be given the contracts to build a railroad that they themselves would use. So the government pays you to build a railroad that then you use to export or get your products to the ports, to get the bananas and other products to the markets in the U.S. So you kind of see what is being set up. I mean, the term Banana Republic was exactly that. It came out of the United Fruit Company, basically directing the government to do whatever it wanted in the different countries where it was, where it had its holdings and where it was exploiting the people. Chiquita Brands International, like its holding company, the United Fruit Company, used third parties for violence against those who would raise concerns about working conditions, about abuses, and of course, as I mentioned, in order to obtain even greater and greater holdings for their agricultural and other interests, they would use third parties to intimidate those families that they wanted to purchase lands from. So again, terrible, terrible history, horrific upheaval and civil unrest because of this corporation just going through and doing whatever it wanted to, wherever it wanted to. Not to get into too much graphic detail, but to give you an example of the horrendous actions of the third parties acting on behalf of Chiquita Brands. One of the victims, whose family was a part of the lawsuit in Florida, his name was David. He was pulled off a bus and beaten to death in front of the other passengers, and then his body was covered in bananas. And later, when his remains were recovered, the cows had already started to eat all of the bananas and part of David as well. So this is what we're talking about in terms of the horrific actions of the third-party terrorist organization on behalf of this corporation. The brutality of this example just shows the lengths to which these corporations will go to protect their economic interests. Again, there's no humanity here. There is no value system. There is no parameters. There's no law. It is simply raw greed. Whatever it is these corporations want, that's what they're going to get, irrespective of who they have to kill to get there. You may recall in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, he actually refers to a 1928 strike in a banana plantation in Colombia, where at first actually the government tries to negotiate a peace and the Chiquita Banana Brands will have none of it. United Fruit Company says, we're not negotiating. We don't care if the workers want fair wages. We don't care if they want safe working conditions. We don't care. And so the army is brought in and the workers are massacred. 300,000 workers had walked off the jobs and thousands will be killed in that massacre. And so that really marks something tragic in the history of Colombia that the people remember. It was about 100 years ago in 1928, and so that is still very marked in the history of Colombia. So whether we are in the mines working, whether we are in the fields working, whether we are in the factories working, we are seen by these corporations, our toil is seen as nothing more than a means to generate income for the shareholders and owners of these corporations. And so I want us to be really, really clear here that this form of economic development is absolutely not viable in the future. There has to be more participation in the benefits of the toil of everyone. And so what does that mean? Well, there are examples, really good examples of very, very successful cooperatives in Europe, for example. Many, many countries in Europe require that workers are actually represented on the board of companies. There are places, of course, where you have specific laws with regard to safety and with regard to minimum wage and with regard to how workers are to be treated and respected. So these are the things we need to work towards everywhere. Not just in the North, not just in some countries, but anywhere workers are being mistreated, workers everywhere truly are being mistreated. And of course, the most important choice we can make every day to support each other is to choose to purchase from small businesses, to choose to purchase from our neighbors that are offering the goods and services that we need every day. Every dollar that you use that goes into a local business will be recirculated in your community, rather than being taken out to wherever corporate headquarters may be around the world. Every day, you make the choice of supporting those around you. And so if there's one message today, the way that we can counter the huge corporate interests that try and sway economies and countries around the world is supporting each other locally. So we wish the families of the victims success in their appeal, and we hope that others will come forward. In fact, I've read that there are thousands now of cases being brought forward of abuse in Colombia. And some of the other places, of course, was the very bloody coup in Guatemala that Chiquita Brands or United Fruit Company had a part in. There was the invasion of Honduras. There are many, many instances where this company has blood on its hands, if it had hands, blood on its shareholders. But I wanted to just give you a highlight of the case in Florida. Now on to my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. So the first book I'm going to recommend is called Bananas, How the United Fruit Company Shaped the World. And of course, it goes much more into detail of what the United Fruit Company did in all of the different countries that I've mentioned, from its origins in Costa Rica, as its tentacles went all north and south, and all of the different political upheaval that it caused, the civil unrest, and all of the different ways that the company hurt people in these countries. And so it's a good read, and if this is an area of interest to you, I'd highly recommend this book, Bananas. The second book I'm going to recommend to you is called Octopus, the United Fruit Company and the Generals. And this specifically talks about how the United Fruit Company orchestrated the bloody coup in Guatemala that led to a 30-year civil war. And they're still finding fosas comunes. They're still finding mass graves. So they now think that the amount of victims is closer to 1 million, which would make it the largest genocide in modern history in this hemisphere. So it would mean about 1 in 10 Guatemalans perished during that civil war. We may never know how many, but they're still finding mass graves, and it's just horrific history, bloody history of Guatemala. And it's one of the reasons why we have so many Central Americans walking north. So we also need to understand the connections. We can't say, we don't want anyone coming from anywhere else, which is ridiculous because this country actually depends on people from other countries, but and then cause upheaval all over the world. That's illogical. That's not real. But I know that with you, we together believe that we should support each other and that we should help each other. And we do that best by caring for those around us and for purchasing those goods and services. We can make sure that our well-being is assured by helping those in our community thrive in their small businesses. So again, would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati. Thank you so much for coming to the end of the video. Please check your local bookstore, your local library for these books. We always leave links for independent booksellers so you can purchase them new or used if you'd like to purchase these books. Thank you so much. And as always, con mucho cariño, mucho salud, mucho amor. Gracias.